let's give a warm Sydney Landsdowne welcome to Mr. David Mcwilliams.
Thank you very much indeed, Eamon, and thanks for the Red Bull as well, which is keeping me awake because I got in last night. I'm not too sure you're in the right place. I'm an economist, actually, and I don't know that we can fill a room talking about economics, but we'll get on there. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. As Eamon said, I was here a couple of years ago presenting a TV program for ABC. That was my first time in Australia. This is only my second time, and as I walked from the hotel across the bridge, I was just walking down thinking, Jesus, this isn't a bad place at all. I was comparing this at dusk to my own hometown of Dunleary at dusk as I was walking across and thinking to myself, this is a fantastic place to be, and maybe, Eamon, we shouldn't keep talking about the diaspora coming home. I think you should stay here. So what I want to do tonight is talk a wee bit about the Irish economy, the European economy, and then maybe in the Q&A we can talk a small bit about the Australian economy to the extent that I know what's going on here, if anything at all, but just looking at the numbers and looking at some broad similarities between what's happening here and what possibly happened in other countries in the last couple of years. But the theme tonight I want to talk about is our own country and how it finds itself in the bizarre position it is. Many, many years ago, like all of us here, we've done all sorts of different jobs. And I've always been intrigued when you talk to foreigners, the extent to which Irish people have done an enormous amount of different jobs, summer jobs, holiday jobs, and then coming here or going to the States or going to Canada or going to the UK and doing whatever it takes. And one of the jobs that I did, one of the more interesting jobs I've done over the years, was that I was the MC for Jack Welch, the chief executive of General Electric, for his book, All Around Europe. This was in 2001. And what happened to Welch is two interesting things, one of which is his grandparents are from Cork, so he's very much part of the diaspora. But the second thing is I've never worked with somebody who works at that pace and that intensity. And my job was to make him look very good, to sit up on stage at big conference centers like this, and ultimately to make Jack look as wise and as sagacious as possible. But I remember, so what happened was every night then the crowds would go and we'd sit up and we'd chat to each other, and it became like kind of a father and son relationship. And I remember one night he talked to me about crises. And so I want to talk about the crisis in Ireland. And he said to me something very interesting. He said, a crisis, whether it's an emotional crisis, a social crisis, a political crisis, a financial crisis, or indeed an economic crisis, he said it demands three things. The first thing you've got to do is define reality, not as you'd like it to be, but as it is. Define reality. Honestly. Second thing you've got to do is you've got to do something about it. Don't talk about it, do something about it. And the third thing is then face into the crisis. Don't postpone it. Prepare yourself, define your reality, do something about it, and then face into it. And he said to me that in his business life, running GE, most of the crises always transpired to be less dislocating, less horrific than you expect them to be as long as you're prepared, as long as you define your reality. And I suspect, living at home, the major problem with us in Ireland is we haven't defined our reality. The reality is, in Ireland, and it's a very strange reality, is that large parts of the middle class are bust. And the reason they're bust is because on their balance sheet, on the one side of the balance sheet, they have assets, or so-called assets, which are falling and have fallen dramatically in value, houses, apartments, etc. On the other side of the balance sheet, they have debts. And this is important to bear in mind for Australia over the course of the next 5 or 6 years. They have debts which are fixed, or in some cases rising in cost. So you've got a balance sheet where assets are over here, which have collapsed, debts are over here, which are fixed or have risen. And that creates what economists call a balance sheet recession. It's a totally different type of recession than any other type of recession. And what we've first got to define ourselves is this is the type of recession that the money, and it's interesting when I talk to politicians and I listen to business leaders in Ireland sometimes, there seems to be an expectation that the money is going to come back. Well, it's not coming back because of what it was spent on. Like, for example, if you're on the TV in Ireland, you have a very strange relationship with Dublin taxi drivers. They either love you or they absolutely hate you. And it's kind of a lottery. You have no idea if it's a lovey type or a hatey type when you get into the cab. And I remember getting into a cab there just at the top of the boom, and I'd done a big TV program, like leading John the Baptist, shouting and roaring and eating locust on my own, saying the whole thing would crash. And I got into a taxi in Dublin Airport, and there was a bloke there. And I got in, and I had no idea. And I got in, and he looked at me, and he was one of those great Dublin taxi drivers who was bleeding enormous. And he had the Dubs GAA jersey, rolled down over him like a condom. He's a bloke who believes blue bubble wrap is a good look in the middle of July. And I got into the car, and he looks at me in the mirror, and he goes, "Oh, sweet Jesus. It's only your bleeding self." I said, "Yes, hi, how are you?" Nice. And he says, "Now, don't get me wrong now, young fella." He said, "I've seen you on the telly. You're very articulate. You're very good with them words. You're quite persuasive. And when she sees you walking around in your suit, you could have quite, you're all right. But when it comes to economics, you talk through your hole." There isn't really much place to go in a Dublin taxi. And he says, I said, "Okay." Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to get the conversation onto soccer, onto Roy Keane or Robbie Keane or Lorraine Keane, any of the Keanes. He's having none of it. And he says, "Where are you coming from?" I said, "London." And he goes, "Oh, right, London, yeah." He says, "I'm only after coming back from Cusa myself 2 nights ago." And then he sticks the love up in the mirror of the car to signify 5. And he says, "After buying 5 gaffs off plans." The golf course coming in 2029. The creme, and he meant to say creme de la creme, but he said creme de menthe of developments. Lovely people, them Greeks. Now, Kusadasi's in Turkey. That money is not coming back. When I hear the boss of AIB saying, "We are going to recover loans," no, you're not. That money is gone, and it's a strange. So this, like, for example, I lived down in Dunleary and up in Glenageary beside me. I'm just trying to think of where the money has gone and why it's not coming back. And I remember again around about 6 or 8 months later, I was walking through Dunleary and I met this Irish friend of mine. Well, she's the wife of a friend of mine. I've known her for a long time, and she used to sound like me, but now she sounds American. Like she's been watching too much Glee with her kids or something. That type of South Dublin woman. And I met her and I said, "Hi, how are you?" And she said, "Hi, David, how are you doing?" I'm fine, actually. She said, "I saw you on TV." Yeah, I said, yeah, right, okay. And she goes, "Would you like to come up and see my island?" I said, "Your what?" She says, "My island." Now, when I was a kid, an island was like Lambay Island or Dalkey Island or the Aran Islands. And I went up to this house in Glenageary, which when you walk into it, when you go up to it, I'm sure you see the same in Australia, it looks like a normal house. But then when you get into it, some architect on acid has got hold of the thing. And it looks like this, like there's big windows and all sorts of things looking out. And and so you walk into the kitchen, which is about the size of this room, actually, because it's absolutely necessary with one child. And there's the yummy mummy, and she's rollerblading around her Pilates balls, And right in the middle of the refurbished kitchen is the island, which is absolutely necessary. 5 sinks going in perfect rotation. And then somewhere down the back of the huge kitchen is the child, who's a genius, by the way. All children in Glenageary are geniuses. And little fucker's reading Sanskrit or something. And he's called Satanta. Or Lear, or any name that predates Jesus by 1,000 years. In any culture, like around where we live, there's loads of Ezekiels. "Oh, Ezekiel, come in for your asparagus tips." So, the island cannot be flogged. It's gone. The money is gone. So the balance sheet recession is real. Why? Because the money has gone. And then what happens in a society when the money has gone and the balance sheet is broken is retailers, they see people who aren't spending and they say, okay, what will we do? What will we do? They're not spending. We'll cut prices, because if we cut prices, people will come in and then everything will be hunky-dory and people start spending again. But the problem is, when your balance sheet is broken, something very strange happens in your head, which is when you see prices falling in normal times, that bring forward your purchase. You say, okay, there's a bargain today. That is a bargain price. I'm going to buy today because you know what? It'll be more expensive tomorrow. But in a balance sheet recession, when prices have been falling for a long, long time, and this goes for the housing market as well as everything else in Ireland, the very act of reducing prices sends the opposite signal to people, because they think, okay, prices are falling, and they've been falling for some time. Do you know what? Prices are going to fall even more tomorrow and next month and next year. So you postpone spending when faced with falling prices, and therefore the economics I learned in school, which was when the price goes down, the demand goes up, is turned on its head. And now, when the price goes down, the demand goes down. And this is happening all over Ireland. And then we have this second problem, which I would call the paradox of deleveraging. So, for example, if the bank comes into me and says, David Mcwilliams, you shouldn't have bought those 5 apartments in Kusadasi. I said, I didn't. It was my taxi driver friend. He said, nonetheless. He says, we think you should sell that apartment you bought in the Gallops, which is not a movable apartment block, but an apartment block in Leopardstown, right? There's actually, the official title is Mimosa at the Gallops. You figure it out. I still drive past it and laugh. Anyway, so the bank says, okay, you should sell that, because if you sell that, that will fix your balance sheet, and that's a really good idea. Sell it, take your money, give it back to us, and your balance sheet's clear, and that's cool, as long as nobody else sells their apartments. And the paradox of deleveraging is that when we all deleverage at the same time, all asset prices fall. And the very individual who's trying to be responsible actually gets into more debt, not less debt, because we're all at the same thing. This is the most important thing for economics, I've always thought. There's only one really important rule in macroeconomics. It's called the paradox of aggregation. And this is when, okay, I'll explain. Has anybody here ever gone to midnight at the Olympia? Go on, stick up your hand. It's all right, you're amongst friends. I have too. Oh, Jesus, there's a whole load of you. Right. So midnight at the Olympia was this bar, early 1990s in Ireland, where you couldn't get a drink after 11 o'clock, and everybody went to midnight at the Olympia. And you'd fall out of the stag's head and stroll across, and I always remember it's terrible if you've got red hair. Bouncers don't like you at all. It's a very strange thing. You know, everyone else goes in and says, no, sorry, you reds are. You're sitting there looking like Father Dougal. Anyway, and I remember you'd go into this thing, and at Midnight Olympia, you'd be sitting around watching something fantastic like the 17th reunion tour of Smokey. And what happens at Midnight Olympia is everyone's drinking away, everything's fine. And then think about this. The fella in front of you stands up. So you're all sitting down in the theatre, the fella in front of you stands up. So you can't see. So then you stand up. So the guy behind you stands up, and the guy behind him stands up. And then the fellow in front of you puts his girlfriend on his shoulders after 17 pints. So you have a big sort of 18-foot wide triffid in front of you, right? And then somebody goes, hi, can I get up on your shoulders? So suddenly you've got something on your shoulders, right? And they say behind you, behind. And then at the end, nobody can see the gig, and all of us are rather uncomfortable in a variety of ways. Now, what's happening? This is the paradox of aggregation. What is good for the individual is not necessarily good for the collective. Because by standing up at the theatre, the guy in front of me forces me to stand up, and then the guy behind me has to stand up, and the girls, etc. So what one person does, which might be good for them, adversely affects the rest of us. Now, this happens in an economy on the downturn when everyone starts to save. Because if we all save, who's buying? And if nobody's buying, who's got any income? And if nobody's got any income, who's got any savings? And if nobody's got any savings, who's got any investment? So what happens in an economy like Ireland, when we start to save, it behaves unusually. Not that saving is a bad thing of itself, but when we all do it at the same time, it causes the economy to go into a tailspin. And the only thing that rises in Ireland is emigration and unemployment. And unemployment, we know, destroys people. My father lost his job when I was a kid, about the same age as my own son. And I know what it does to families. I know how it destroys people. I remember I used to listen to my mum and dad. You know, you go up on the stairs and the parents think you're in bed, you're about 10 years old. I used to listen to them. They used to be, you know, these kind of worried conversations that parents have when their kids have gone to bed. And how many conversations like that, this was back in the early 80s, how many late 70s, how many conversations like that do you think are happening every single night all over Ireland? And that's the problem. The problem is unemployment. The second thing is that, unlike most other countries, when the going gets tough, the Irish get going. And we come to places like this. And it was reinforced to me about emigration a few years ago when I came here first to present from ABC. And obviously, Aussie presenters don't tend to have freckles and red hair, which means they like to go in the sun. And a lot of Australian television, like if you make TV programs in Ireland, nobody gives a damn because it's always raining. So you can turn up looking like a maggot, and it doesn't matter at all. But here, it's quite different. And I hadn't really understood the Aussie accent so well. I hadn't really understood this obsession with something called the light. I said, the what? And the director goes, oh yeah, David, the light is going to be amazing tomorrow morning. I said, okay. I said, you know, I don't like the light. He says, doesn't matter. And we started the very first, he said, the light's going to be amazing. And we shot the very opening scene of this on Bondi at about 20 past, we got up about 20 past 4, and I was a wreckage. I'm brutal in the morning, right? And so we were in Bondi, and it was totally empty except for a few incredibly handsome gay men, right? All plucked and waxed and the whole thing, right? They looked like Martians or something to me. And they were over there, and they were waiting for the wife. So I was fine, and I was there trying to open my eyes. And the Aussie camera crew's in front of me, and the director's going, and what happens on TV, you get this countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The red light goes on, and I had to deliver the opening scene of, this is the most expensive financial documentary ABC have ever made. So I was about to open the thing, and I was a bit nervous. And I was like, okay, just remember your lines, blah, 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 opening scene. And just as he called 3, 2, 1, out of the corner of my eye, at about 3, I saw them. 2 lads in Waterford GAA jerseys. And I'm just thinking, oh, jeez, the dash, I scribble over them. And the little tight GAA nicks, little tight jokes, right? And the O'Neill's ball, right? Hammered. Like I'd been drinking all day and all night. They must have just arrived, right? So I see them. The Aussies don't see them because they're looking at me. So you've got me, the Aussies, the sea, and the 2 culchies, right? And I'm just about to open my mouth to deliver the opening lines for ABC's massive documentary, and all I hear is, "Up you dirty queer Mcwilliams." It's quite difficult to come back from that. So I'm not necessarily saying we're exporting our best and brightest, but we are exporting. The point is that our country is different because we emigrate in huge, huge numbers, unprecedented for a European country. And those that stay get left in the dole, and that destroys the fabric of society. My cousin, because my mother's from Cork, and all Cork people, are snobs. They're great. It's just in the genes. I don't know what's wrong with them. It's fantastic, Look, I'm half one of you, so it's all right, right? And my cousin's name in the family is actually Eamon the Doctor, and Eamon the Doctor. You know those sort of fellas who are nearly 50 and still remember how many points they got in the leaving cert? He's one of them. But the interesting thing is, Eamon the Doctor was telling me the other day, about 4 or 5 months ago, I met him and we were chatting away, and he said, forget your economics books. If you really want to know what's going on in the society, come to a GP's clinic all around the country. He's a GP outside of Galway in one of the big commuter towns. And he's making the point to me that he is prescribing enormous amounts of antidepressants. And he doesn't know what to deal with it because he's not equipped to deal with it. He's a local GP. And so what I'm saying is that when the economy contracts, it's very deep. And it's extraordinarily profound and lasting. The impact is. So that's why you have to stop it. That's why if a policy isn't working, you've got to stop it straight away. And this policy of austerity, without forgiving some of the debts on this side of the balance sheet that I spoke of, cannot work. And it hasn't worked for the last 5 years. It's the interesting thing. We've been at the austerity game for 5 years now. And I don't know if somebody very clever, I'm not too sure whether it was Albert Einstein or Roy Keane once said, the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So that's what we're doing. And all the while, we're not becoming more credible, we're actually becoming less credible. Because credibility in economics is a function of the growth rate. And if your growth rate has been hammered by these extraordinary internal and external forces, and is amplified by this huge anvil of debt that the people are carrying, then you're not credible. Then you just become a country that is a ward of another country. And we have become a ward of Germany, which is unusual in itself, given that we do most of our trade with Britain and America. We've become a ward of Germany. And as a consequence of that, it might be strange for you when you're so far away, but the second and third guessing of the intentions of minor-rate German politicians has now become the central determining factor in the Irish economy with respect to this debt deal and what have you. We can talk about that in a wee while. But the problem is that Obama used this expression in his first term, his first election campaign. It was a very interesting expression. It was called the extreme urgency of now. That now is important. Not tomorrow, not the next day, now. And J.K. Galbraith, the brilliant economist, wrote in the 1950s, he wrote about economic and political leadership. He says the role of the leader is to understand the anxieties of the people and do something about it. To understand the anxieties of the people and do something about it. The anxieties of Irish people are now twofold. For my generation and younger, it is the enormous debts that many hundreds of thousands carry and can't function with them. For example, 128,000 people are in arrears. This is real. And the interesting thing about a balance sheet recession is that most recessions, if you buy yourself time, things get better. But if your recession is characterized by too much debt, if you buy yourself time, things get worse. They actually get worse. And we're seeing that. So we need to fix this now. And we need to, in some way, try and move the discussion away from we will take whatever we're given to something much more interesting. Now, many people say, oh, but you can't do that. The financial markets would punish you. Well, they are punishing us already. The financial markets punished Ireland. The IMF is in Ireland not because we threatened to default, but because we threatened to pay. It's true. We said, don't worry, we have the money. Oh yeah, it's in a jar over the telly. We'll just get it after Coronation Street. Right? Now the point is, other countries have done different things. And one of these countries is Iceland, for example. About 2 years ago, I decided to, no, about 3 years ago actually it was now. Time flies in your mid-40s, it's very scary. I decided, all the politicians around said, oh, Jesus, you wouldn't want to be Iceland. Oh, Iceland is a terrible basket case. Don't even look at Iceland. Don't even go to Donegal. You wouldn't know what would happen if you look in that general direction. And I decided to go up and have a look at what a basket case was looking like. So I flew to Iceland. It's a very nice flight, actually, if you get on a good day out over the Hebrides. And it's really, really nice up over Scotland. And anyway, all the way up to Iceland. And I did that very extraordinarily profound and detailed, rigorous analysis. I talked to publicans and barmen and taxi drivers and got a feel for the place. But after about 3 days there, having talked to a lot of people, I got the overwhelming impression that the only people who were worried in Iceland, even though Iceland had defaulted and devalued and de-everythinged, and they were a pariah and they were a basket case, the only people who were worried in Iceland were English bankers in the Hilton looking for their money back. And I put this to the Icelandic finance minister, and he looked at me blankly and he goes, "But we have no money. It's all gone. We can give them fish if they like." Now, here was a man who defined his reality. He actually had defined his reality. He said, "We're here in Iceland, the money's all gone. Yeah, we spent it, and poof, it's gone." And that's what happens in crashes. It goes poof and disappears. This is the interesting thing in Ireland. I say, "Oh, somebody has all the money." No, it's gone. It disappears. That's the magic of leverage. It just goes poof. It's not hidden under the mattress somewhere. It goes. And the assets that you thought were worth 500,000 are worth 100,000. So the Icelandics defined their reality. They didn't borrow in order to pay back bad debt, which is what we're doing. Because you know one thing about economics, if your balance sheet is broken by too much debt, you don't make it better by more debt, you make it better by less debt. And it's called co-responsibility. You know, if it's the same thing. You know, if I lend you, Eamon, for example, 10 grand and you go on the lash, who's at fault? Who's the sucker in the relationship? Me, exactly. So the lad who lends should be slightly more prudent than the lad who borrows. And when things go bad, it's a thing called co-responsibility that we need to exercise and to deploy, where the creditors and the debtors together, nobody getting off scot-free, but together do a deal. And we need to do this in Ireland on mortgage debt. My big fear is we're going to get this deal on bank debt, and I'll talk about that in a sec, because I think Germany needs a deal. But they'll do a deal on bank debt, and the Irish won't bring forward mortgage debt, and we'll have another crisis when those mortgages default. So the financial markets are back in Iceland. Financial markets want growth. They don't punish. I've worked in them for years. They want a balance sheet that's clean. You take losses and you move on. You just move on. It's called capitalism. And the country is not improving. So we know that there's no financial reason or economic reason to pursue this policy. So is there something deeper in the Irish psyche that can explain why our negotiators are negotiating the way they do? And I think there is. And this is the good room mentality. Did anybody's granny here have a good room? Stick up your hands. Oh, look at that. Oh, yes. Okay. Or even your ma might have had a good room. Okay, okay. My granny had a good room that was so good I wasn't good enough to go into it. That's how good it was, right? In fact, none of our family were good enough to go into it. It was kept for people who were gooder than us. Down in Cork, producing doctors, don't you know? All classes of professionals in our family down in Cork. And it's true, I remember, it's funny, you know, but when you stand up in Ireland and you say things that are against the grain, and it's slightly different, your ideas go through 3 phases. This is what happened to me with the housing boom, when I said, you know, I'm not a genius, but I think it's going to collapse, which wasn't greatly inspired economics, it was just common sense. And the ideas in Ireland go through 3 phases, and this is a little story on how Cork people think. It was the first phase, your ideas is ridicule. You're ridiculed openly. In my case, you'd have to go in the late and deal with fucking Egypts, you know? And you have to look at them. This is like 5 years ago or 6 years ago. And then the second phase, when your ideas are getting a wee bit of traction, it's the violent opposition phase. So the first phase is ridicule. The second phase is violent opposition. And in my case, that culminated with Bertie eloquently wondering aloud why I didn't go and commit suicide. And my mother, of course, she rang me. She says, "Bertie Ahern mentioned you inside in the Dáil today." I said, "Yes, Mum, but it wasn't that complimentary." She says, "I don't care. He didn't mention Mrs. McCarthy's son. So that's the second phase, the violent opposition phase. And then the third phase is where we are now, which is everybody pretends they were on your side all the time phase. Which is where we are in Ireland now. Oh, we all knew it was a bubble. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Anyway, so the point is, right, let's think about the good room, right? The good room being kept for people who were better than us. And my granny used to have us scrubbed like little sentries, okay, when the priest came in. And my sisters and I, and whatever poor old cousin was in the house, we'd all sit there and we weren't allowed to talk until the priest spoke. And my granny used to take out all this delf and china. And my granny pretended that it was really normal for us to eat off the delf and to drink out of these Waterford crystal glasses. And I was, you're petrified because you drop the thing, you'd be killed, right? And I'd sit there drinking me my waddy, freaked out. And it was really weird in the good room because I remember my granny had these very strange things. She had, oh yeah, of course, every good room has a bragging wall, right? And in our case, it was a bragging wall, and to this day, particularly if you had educated people in the family, to this day there was a picture of a geezer in a mortarboard, and we have no idea who it was. No idea at all. It was bought in a sailor work or something, right? But apparently that was my second cousin in New Zealand who got a doctorate. Anyway. And the good people come in, and then I remember we'd be drinking in my waddy, and there was also something very strange. There was a big unopened bottle of Beefeater gin in the good room. And I'd be looking at the Beefeater, and he'd be looking at me. And of course, the Beefeater was there for a reason. Because despite all the Republican West Cork carry on about the Provos and, all that bail in the below and all that stuff, the Beefeater was there to make that little part of the good room kind of British. Because Granny knew the British was still kind of posher. And then when the good person left, we'd have to wrap up all the china in old copies of the Irish Independent, not the Irish Press, by the way, in our house, and put it into the drawer, and the good room was locked, right? Now think about that mentality. If you ask French or German people about good rooms, they've no idea what you're talking about. It's a deep Irish insecurity, that we were insecure to say, do you know what? We're happy out. It's not a big deal. This is who we are. We were trying to pretend we were somebody else. And the interesting thing is the really posh people, they pretended we were somebody else too. So they pretended we were posh, we pretended we were posh, and that's how the status quo remained. Now take that and go to Brussels, the new good room, and think about our negotiators. Okay, I'm somebody who spent time as an economist in the central bank, so I have a little small experience in the public sector. So imagine the head of the Department of, Agriculture, Mick, and he stabbed his way up to the top. Because that's how you get on in the public sector. It's true. Stabbed his way all the way up, and there's all sorts of fellas with prints in their back as they're booked over bridges and things. And Mick went to the Christian Brothers in, Clonmel. And he goes in to the new good room in Brussels. Oh, he's delighted to be there. Don't you know how many stories you can tell in the golf club, right? In Clonmel. And sitting opposite Mick is Jean-Claude. And Jean-Claude is his French counterpart. And his French counterpart is very sophisticated. He has 5 lovers. He knows exactly what is lobster bisque. And Mick just has the horn being in the good room. And so when Jean-Claude impolitely points out, Mick, I believe your banking system is broke. No, it's not. No, it isn't broke at all. No, we have all the money, don't worry. There's a cavalry coming over the hill, it'll be grand. We do have it, the 64 billion, oh yeah, we have it. So, rather than negotiate on behalf of the people, our negotiators negotiate on behalf of the others. Because it's the only thing that explains what's going on. So we negotiate in order to ingratiate. The Americans have a great expression, which is, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And I'm sure the Aussies have a similar sort of commercial hardness. In Ireland, we are negotiating in order to make Mrs. Merkel feel good about herself, because she's better than us. Now, what happens then is the economy continues to contract all the time. And in the same way as my granny would be happy to put up with any privation during the week as long as we scrubbed up in the good room, our politicians and civil servants and top negotiators seem to think that what's going on in the real economy is of no consequence, that we can push this out for another few years, and yes, more people are unemployed, and yes, more people will go to Australia, but it doesn't matter because we keep up appearances. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a very destructive internal dynamic in our country. Because what it does is it undermines us as a people, and it goes deep, and it plays to our insecurities. And then it becomes contagious, because this attitude becomes regarded as normal. And it's like sort of a virus in a creche, that one wants, somebody says, oh, well, that's what we should do, then another person, then another person. This is how groupthink emerges in a society, that it becomes acceptable, that the ideas bounce from one to the other, right? I said virus in a creche because I don't know if any of you moved here after having kids in Ireland, but in the last few years there have been outbreaks of nits. Like when I was a kid, there was no nits at all. It was very unusual. Now they're all the time. And my wife's from the north, and she's from a part of Belfast that, let's say, the SDLP wouldn't get their return. And of course, our kids are little Protestants, of course, and they go to the little Protestant school in Killiney, and all the other kids look, they're scrubbed like little Protestants. And my wife will have this no other way. And I remember, you know, the fifth outbreak of nits in the class. And the letter comes through. Dear Mrs. Mcwilliams, there's been yet another outbreak of nits. And that sparks this kind of suburban torquemada. It's like an Spanish Inquisition, as all the mummies try to find out which mummy isn't combing the hair properly with the tea tree oil. Okay? And then that mummy is ostracized. There's no Pilates for you, darling. No downward dog for you, darling. I remember hearing my wife talking to her mother, and she'd never mentioned anything before, and she was very, very, very cool and never said anything sectarian for years. And all I heard on the phone was saying, I just can't believe it. These Fenians are filthy. I was like, what? I said, you can't say that here, darling. She was, oh, sorry, didn't mean it. Back to my best behavior. Our house is a bit of a hoot during the year, around the 12th. Anyway, so me and the kids go. My point is, ideas go the same way. They become acceptable. And it has now become acceptable in Ireland by serious people to believe that this negotiating stance is the right thing to do. In the same way as it became acceptable for serious people to say in the boom, house prices will only go up, or there will be a soft landing. Serious people said that. And what happens is the person who goes against the grain and states the obvious is regarded as reckless, because the conventional wisdom becomes ingrained. And conventional wisdom is only another word for groupthink. And it is groupthink that got us into this problem in Ireland. The inability to analyze properly, the inability to say, do you know what? That doesn't figure. It doesn't stack up. And again, Galbraith said something beautiful about conventional wisdom. He said, conventional wisdom is never, ever deposed by some brilliantly persuasive, countervailing argument which persuades people to change their mind. Conventional wisdom is always and ever destroyed by the great march of events. The housing market in Ireland collapsed not because I said it was going to collapse, but because prices started to fall. That's why it collapsed. I know that the cure to high prices is actually higher prices, if you think about it, because higher prices eventually become asphyxiated, and then we fall back. And the cure for conventional wisdom is never some great persuasive argument, but is events. And unfortunately, I believe that what was going to happen in the country is that we will see the beginning of a process which you saw in America of mortgage default. Not because people want to default, nobody does, but because they have to default. The heroine of my new book, it's an unusual thing, it's written through the eyes of a 32-year-old pregnant woman, which is quite an achievement for a 45-year-old not pregnant man. But it comes from having talked, she's a teacher, and it comes from having talked to loads and loads of young teachers. You guys probably know cousins or family or friends or brothers and sisters. And she finds second baby on the way, and she starts doing the sums. And everybody knows when kids arrive, your household budget implodes. Your best laid plans disappear, because that's what happens. And she is an amalgamation of maybe 15 people that I spoke to, of a certain generation, this Pope's children generation, who bought in the boom not because they were reckless, but because they thought they were being responsible. Because everyone said, that's what you do. You settle down, you buy a house, even if it's expensive because you want to be responsible. Don't be irresponsible and rent. It's the great Irish parental advice. Be irresponsible and buy. So she is every person. And this is hundreds of thousands of people. Hundreds of thousands. And if we, the Irish people, don't look after and don't have compassion for those of our fellow citizens who find themselves in difficulty, this recession will go on for a long time. But the choice is ours. And I come back to my central point. What we have to do in Ireland is define reality, do something about it, and face into the crisis. And having done all that, we know the crisis will not be half as difficult as we initially expected. Thank you very much.